I'd like to introduce our first speaker today. Delaney graduated with a Bachelor in Science, majoring in Vision Science in 2015 from the University of New South Wales. She then graduated with a Master of Public Health from the University of Sydney in 2017. She's been working with the MGFA for over 18 months as an education officer, providing all the non-clinical support that a patient, family member, or carer might require. Delaney also has previous experience working with volunteers at the Cancer Council New South Wales, offering training and support. Welcome, Delaney.
Thanks, Niv. Thank you for that introduction. Hi, everybody. I hope everybody's going well. Before we begin, I did have a bit of a disclaimer. The information that we're providing today, it is quite general in nature. So if you do have any specific questions, we do recommend that you talk to your eye care professional or your GP, just to make sure that that information works for you personally. So moving on to today's program. I'll be taking you through very briefly an introduction into age-related macular degeneration, or AMD, and some of its risk factors. We'll be going through the nutritional recommendations for macular health before moving on to some of the latest research updates regarding nutritional recommendations. And then we're going to moving on to the more practical side of this webinar, when Julie Glide, a dietitian, will be joining us and telling us exactly how we can incorporate all of these really great foods into our daily diet. We'll also quickly go through the Macular Disease Foundation Australia and what we do before we answer some of your questions. Okay, so now moving on to age-related macular degeneration, or AMD. Now, a lot of you in the audience might be diagnosed with the condition, or perhaps you have a friend or family member with the disease, or perhaps you're at risk of diagnosis. What I'd like to say is you're definitely not alone. AMD is very common in Australia. 1 in 7 over the age of 50 have some form of the condition, and this increases to 1 in 3 when we get to the age of 80. And it's actually the leading cause of legal blindness in Australia. So very, very common condition. Now, some of you might know AMD as either wet macular degeneration or perhaps dry macular degeneration. This is how AMD used to be classified. It's actually classified a little bit differently now. So we put it into 3 different stages. So there is an early stage, an intermediate stage, and a late stage. And then the late stage is divided into dry and wet. Now, this will become a little bit more relevant when we go through the research portion of this webinar. But the most important thing to take at the moment is, regardless of which stage you're at, what we all want to try and do is to slow down the progress of the condition. If you're at risk but haven't been diagnosed, what you want to do is reduce your risk of diagnosis. And how can we do that? That's by reducing our risks, or reducing the risk factors. Now, what are the risk factors of AMD? Well, the first one is age. I already spoke about how 1 in 7 over the age of 50 have some form of the disease, and this increases to 1 in 3 when we get to the age of 80. Family history is quite a big risk factor as well. So if you have any direct family members with AMD, we really do encourage that you get regular eye tests and let your eye care professional know that you do have that family history there. Smoking. This is a very big risk factor as well. Those that smoke have a higher likelihood of being diagnosed with AMD by about 3 to 4 times. And finally, poor diet. Again, a very, very big risk factor for AMD, not just for diagnosis, but for increasing progression as well. And this is what we're going to be focusing on today. What can we do in terms of our diet to slow down the progress of the disease, or to reduce the risk of being diagnosed? Now, at the beginning of the webinar, I know that Niv told everybody how you can pop in some questions and then select send so we can see those. I'm actually going to turn that around a little bit, and I'm going to ask you a question. So my question is, what are some foods do you think that are great for the health of your eyes? So just go to that question bar, pop in your answers, and then select send, and then it'll just pop up on my screen and I'll be able to see those. Yep. Okay, yeah, a couple of answers coming through already. That's really great to see. Yep, so we have a few people saying green leafy vegetables. Yes, great. Nuts. Yep, that's another good one as well. A couple of people saying carrots. I'll get back to that one. Green leafy vegetables again. Great. Okay, thank you so much. Oh, fish as well. Yeah. So thank you so much for those answers, guys. Those were really great. Just going back to those of you that said carrots. I know that carrots are associated with really good vision. However, that is a little bit of a fable. For those of you that don't know, that rumor actually started in World War II. What happened was the British discovered radar. Radar is if you're flying overhead, it allows pilots to see buildings on the ground, even if it's pitch black. So the British, they discovered radar, but they didn't want the enemy to know that they'd done so. So what did they do? They put out a rumor that their pilots had been eating a lot of carrots and had developed night vision. And look, this doesn't mean you should stop eating carrots. They're really great for overall health, but there are some foods which are specifically good for the macula. The first being, as a few of you said, green leafy vegetables. So that's your spinach, silver beet, kale, even broccoli, lettuce. All of those contain a nutrient called lutein, and lutein is found in high concentrations in a healthy macula. So we say try and eat green leafy vegetables every day if you can. Secondly, oily fish. When I say oily fish, I don't mean the battered kind like fish and chips. I mean fish which is high in omega-3 fatty acids. So that's your salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, even tuna to a lesser degree does have omega-3s. We recommend that about 2 to 3 times a week. Next, we recommend a handful of raw unsalted nuts. So with the nuts, we're looking at Brazil nuts, almonds, pine nuts, and walnuts. So just a handful of those a week, and you'll have your daily recommended intake. We also recommend foods which are considered low GI or low glycemic index. To put it simply, it just means foods which release energy into the body slowly. So instead of going for white bread, going for brown bread. Instead of going for white rice, going for brown rice. And finally, just as an overall statement, we like to say, try and eat a whole range of fruits and vegetables. Try to eat all colors of the rainbow because it means you're going to get a whole variety of those nutrients. Now, some of you might already be eating these foods that we recommend, which is really great, but you might not be getting all the nutrients that you need. So what you can do here is to supplement the diet. So for your green leafy vegetables, there are a number of lutein supplements out there. There's a few brands that do that, so you can just pop into your local chemist and get those. For your oily fish, now some of you in the audience, you might already be taking fish oil supplements or maybe krill oil supplements, and they may be really great for a lot of other conditions. However, specifically for AMD, there's no research to show that it will be beneficial in slowing progression or reducing the risk of diagnosis. So if you can, try and eat the fish if possible. Okay, now moving on to the research portion of this webinar. So we're just going to look at 2 of the newest research studies in the area that are linked to AMD. The first one is about flavonoids. Flavonoids is a powerful antioxidant that's found in a number of fruits and vegetables. This study was particularly looking at the flavonoids in oranges. It followed over 2,000 people over a period of 15 years, everybody being over the age of 50, and it found that those who ate more oranges in their diet were less likely to be diagnosed with AMD. Now, it is quite a novel study and further studies do need to be conducted for it to be confirmed, but adding a couple of oranges in your diet hopefully would be beneficial. And secondly, there was another research study done on eggs. So again, this followed over 2,000 people all over the age of 49, again for a 15-year period. And it found that those who had 2 to 4 eggs a week were less likely to progress to wet AMD. It also found that those who had more eggs in their diet were less likely to be diagnosed with AMD as well. Again, similar to the oranges, quite a novel study and therefore not confirmed just yet, but adding those eggs could be beneficial again. Now, I did mention this before, but I will mention it again. All of this advice that we're giving you, it is quite general in nature. So please do talk to your doctor before you take those recommendations on board, or your eye care professional, and particularly with supplements as well. So now we're going to move on to the more practical side of the webinar. And this is where I will introduce Julie Glide, who is our dietitian. Julie is one of a team of specialist aged care dietitians working across Australia for Leading Nutrition. Leading Nutrition are leaders in aged care dietetic services with dietitians working in each state in Australia. Julie is passionate about improving the health and quality of life of clients in her care, as well as sharing her love of healthy and nutritious food as part of healthy eating. Hi, Julie. Thank you so much for joining us, and I can't wait to hear what you have in store.
Thanks, Delaney, for that, and hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here with you today. So, first of all, let me say that, as Delaney said, there's some important nutrients that we get from food that have been shown to be useful in stopping the progression of macular degeneration. So let's have a look again at what some of those are. So as Delaney mentioned, we have got eggs, dark green leafy vegetables, oranges. So let's having a look now at eggs and fish, of course. So first of all, the yolk in eggs contains lutein and also something called zeaxanthin. So these are something that we call carotenoids. So the carotenoids are a provitamin A, and they're very protective against developing macular disease. So eggs have had a bit of a bad rap over time, because at one stage they were considered to be high in cholesterol, and so to prevent heart disease, people were told to limit their eggs. But now we know that really having an egg a day is beneficial, and that's not considered too many. And so you can certainly get those 2 to 4 eggs a week to be protective and give you the lutein from eggs. So how do we incorporate eggs into our diet? So really, we can put eggs into any meal at all, breakfast, lunch or dinner. And so for breakfast, for example, we could use it in an omelette, or poached, boiled or scrambled. And I guess the beauty of an omelette is you can also incorporate some leafy green vegetables and other vegetables into that omelette. Lunchtime, so curried eggs or egg sandwiches, savoury eggs again, and really for dinner, a similar situation as breakfast. But also don't forget that a lot of cakes and slices contain eggs, and so you can get eggs that way as well and get the benefit of that lutein in the eggs. All right, so our dark green leafy vegetables, again, high in lutein. But one thing we need to remember about lutein is that it does need it's fat soluble, so we do need a bit of a fat source. So if you're having a salad, adding a little bit of oil or salad dressing with oil in it to that salad is a good idea. And even maybe adding a little bit of olive oil or flaxseed oil to your vegetables if you've steamed them. So if we want to incorporate some green leafy vegetables, I've just got a slide here that shows a pork stir fry in 3 different stages. So first of all, it's just the pork and the vegetables have been stir fried, and I've just added a couple of handfuls of some baby spinach into that. And you don't need to actually cook that out, you just need to flick it through, as you can see in the second picture. And then finally, I've added some noodles to that. And certainly at this stage, you could add, you could either replace the pork with an omelette that you've cooked, or you could add an omelette to that as well as the pork if you wanted to. So don't be afraid to experiment with some of those green leafy vegetables, like things like kale, for example. Often people are a little bit afraid to have a bit of an experiment with kale. So making some kale chips, for example. So just basically tearing the kale into pieces, sprinkling it with a little bit of olive oil on some baking paper, and pop it into an oven at about 180 degrees. Keep an eye on it because it does tend to crisp up quite quickly. And when you can see that it's sort of dried and crispy, take it out and you've got some instant kale chips that you can either add to other dishes or just eat on their own. Okay, so what about warfarin? So often people can be taking a drug called warfarin. So green leafy vegetables in particular contain a lot of vitamin K, and that helps our blood to clot. However, some people are prescribed warfarin to thin the blood and to prevent clotting when it's not needed. So if you eat a lot of foods with vitamin K, it sort of cancels out or inhibits the action of warfarin. So you've got to be a little bit careful there. There's also components in food that can do something that enhances warfarin. So there's an enzyme in our liver that breaks down warfarin, and so if that enzyme is stopped from breaking down the warfarin, we get sort of an increased effect of the warfarin, and so that we can end up with increased bleeding. So, for example, grapefruit and Seville oranges can affect that enzyme, and so often people have been told to avoid grapefruit and Seville oranges, and that's certainly not the only list of things that have been investigated as being an issue with warfarin. And then, so we need to take that into consideration if you are on warfarin. However, what do we do? So what do we actually eat? So if we consider the amount of foods that contain vitamin K, if we cut all of those foods out, and also the foods that are affected by that enzyme, then we are going to severely reduce our availability of foods that we can choose. So the first thing you need to do, particularly if you are considering increasing your intake of green leafy vegetables, is to check with your GP first. Let your GP know and discuss that with him. Make sure that you keep your intake of foods high in vitamin high in vitamin K, about the same each day and week. So don't decide that you're suddenly going to go and start eating broccoli every day when you haven't normally done it. But if you normally eat broccoli once a week, then stick to eating broccoli once a week. Don't overindulge in any one type of fruit or vegetable. So again, choosing lots of different vegetables is certainly the best way to go. And of course, if you are taking warfarin, then you should be checking with your GP fairly regularly and making sure that you're having your INR checked. All right, so juicing. So juicing's become quite popular in the last sort of 10 years or so. And I think we're about to get a visitor. I'm very sorry that my cat has just decided to join us. He's an unexpected visitor. So the pros of juicing, first of all, it does make having lots of green vegetables and fruit easy to consume if you like your fruit and vegetables in a juice. It can be fun and experimental, mixing some of those flavours together to see what you come up with. But there are some issues when it comes to juicing with not only warfarin, but a couple of other things as well. So first of all, if we're looking at particularly some of the carotenoids or these beneficial substances, in a lot of raw vegetables, they are trapped within what we call the cell matrix of the vegetable, and so they require cooking to release like the volume that we need to take in. So often if we're juicing things raw, we may not be getting all the benefit of those nutrients. Green leafy vegetables in particular are high in something called oxalates, and if we're having a lot of raw green leafy things juiced up, then we may be taking in a lot more oxalates than we really should be, and that may contribute to kidney stones. And again, with warfarin, because it takes quite a few leaves to make a glass full of green juice, we could be actually intaking a lot more vitamin K than we normally would. So need to be a little bit careful when it comes to juicing. So again, looking at the, you know, like not overdoing it and just being aware of the amount of green leafy vegetables and fruit that you're putting into that glass of juice. Okay, so if we take a look at fruit now, as Delaney mentioned, oranges, there's been some research to show that the flavonoids in oranges can be of benefit, not only for like as an antioxidant, but also to assist with not developing macular degeneration, but also to prevent the progression of it. So one thing we do need to be a little bit careful of is orange juice. So bearing in mind that if we're going to drink sort of 2 or 3 glasses of orange juice a day, then that we could be potentially having a similar amount of sugar to having you know, 8 to 10 oranges. So roughly as a guide, a glass of orange juice could be equal to around 3 to 4 oranges. So just be a little bit careful with the orange juice because you may consume slightly more sugar than you should. But as far as actually eating the fruit goes, then the recommendation I think is equal to or greater than 1 orange a day. Okay, so fish and seafood. So good source of omega-3 fatty acids. Also shellfish, very high in zinc. So we want to be looking at oily fish. So tuna, salmon, sardines, herring, mackerel, all of those are oily fish. And certainly there are lots and lots of ways of having those in our diet. So they can be all incorporated into dishes. Canned salmon and tuna is fine. It doesn't have to be always fresh. And same with sardines. So you can have sardines on toast, or you could incorporate the tuna into a casserole with a sauce. So the recommendation is to have an oily fish at least 3 times a week. So if you're someone who is not overly keen on fish or seafood, or you might have an allergy, you can also get your omega-3 from walnuts or flaxseed, or even flaxseed oil. Okay, so looking at supplements, so why not just take a supplement? So first of all, as Leni mentioned, there's no conclusive evidence that taking an omega-3 supplement is beneficial for macular degeneration. There just isn't enough evidence, but certainly there is evidence for having omega-3 from food. So first of all, the other thing is that we get benefits from food intake that we don't get from supplements. So for example, food provides us with other things besides vitamins and minerals. So we have fibre in our food, we've got other phytochemicals that are present in food, and antioxidants as well that we don't get from supplements. We also have some synergistic effects of food. So when we eat food, we eat all the components of the food, not just the individual nutrient. And so we're looking at some enhanced effects from the different combinations of food that we're eating in a meal that we don't necessarily get with a supplement. All right, so anybody who was probably born between 1950 and 1960 might recognise that little robot there with his arms waving going danger, danger. So we do have to be a little bit careful with some supplements in particular because they can have some side effects if we take too many of them. Zinc, for example, if taken in too high doses, can cause some nasty tummy upsets and also changes in taste and smell. So you might get some abdominal pain, some vomiting or diarrhea. Vitamin A as well. Too much vitamin A can also cause some gastrointestinal problems, headache and loss of appetite. And in extreme cases, there have been situations where people have died from taking too many vitamin A supplements. That has to be a large amount over a long period of time. So the general advice is certainly don't exceed recommendations on the vitamin supplement bottle, and certainly consult with your GP if you're feeling unwell and you've taken vitamins. So currently, I think as far as the lutein supplement that Delaney mentioned, I think at an intake of 10 to 20 milligrams is considered safe. Okay, so we've talked quite a lot about foods that are good for our macular health or our eye health, but we also have to consider our general health overall. So if you have a look at the visual here of the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, it divides up our 5 food groups, and we can see that we've got our grains, so things like our rice, bread, pasta, and what we need to be aiming for is for whole grain varieties of those, and particularly for macular health, the whole grain varieties are usually the low GI foods, and that's what we need to be aiming for. Then our vegetables, so plenty of different colours, including our green leafy vegetables, and we need to be choosing 5 serves a day. So there's plenty of option there to have green leafy vegetables every day, and also include quite a few different colours. So aim to get as many colours over the week as you can. Then we have our meat and meat alternatives. So we've got our fish, shellfish, eggs, legumes, our pork, chicken, all in this group. So again, looking at having our oily fish at least 3 times a week, and including some other seafood in there as well. And certainly our eggs are in this group as well, so making sure that we're having those serves of eggs at least 2 to 4 a week to help with our eye health. So our other two groups, so first of all, we've got our fruit. So at least 2 pieces of fruit a day, and include oranges once daily. And again, with our fruit, try and have as many different varieties as you can in season, and just to improve your overall intake of all those good phytochemicals. And then lastly, we've got our dairy group. Again, not as important for our eyes, but certainly a group particularly for older Australians. That is one of our good sources of calcium. And so something that certainly as we age that we need to make sure that we have a reasonable calcium intake. And lastly, remember, drink plenty of water is also important. And one thing you probably noticed isn't on there is any oils. So they don't actually form part of our healthy eating plate. But if we are going to choose oils, then probably the healthier oils would be to choose the extra virgin olive oil, and certainly you can incorporate flaxseed, because that will also, flaxseed oil will also be giving you some omega-3. So that brings us to the end. So I will hand back over to Niv now to go through how we're going to answer some of those questions that you have.
Great. Thanks so much, Julie. So thank you so much to both Delaney and Julie for that. It was extremely informative, and I think we all learnt a lot. It was really great to hear not only about nutrition and macular health, but also ways that we can incorporate that into our diet. So just a reminder, if you have any questions about anything either Delaney or Julie went through, please click on the questions icon and then type your question into the white box and click send. I will be reading out the questions very shortly, and as I mentioned before, other attendees will not be able to see your questions, so there are no silly questions, only myself and the presenters will be able to. So before I actually move on to the questions, I just wanted to speak a little bit about what the MGFA does. We do have a number of pillars of work, with the first one being education. So we provide accurate, current and ongoing information. Just last year, we reached almost 7,000 people doing talks such as this one. Another pillar of work is awareness. We want to increase the awareness of AMD within New South Wales and also nationwide. Awareness about getting regular eye tests and generally increasing awareness about macular diseases. Another is client services. So we provide support for all our patients and also facilitate access to other support services. I'll talk a little bit more about this later as well. Another is advocacy. It is our privilege to advocate for the very best interests of the macular community, whether it be designing policies for state and federal governments or making sure medical benefits do not get cut. Another is research. 100% of funds donated for research goes into our research grants program, and since 2011, we've given a massive $3.6 million to 18 different research projects. And of course, finally, fundraising. All of this would not be possible without all the generous support that we have received over the years. I'd like to thank each and every one of you who have helped us along the way. So now this is how we can help you. You can reach out to us on our toll-free helpline, which I've listed many times throughout this webinar, so 1-800-111-709 for any inquiries you might have, not just about nutrition, but also AMD or diabetic eye disease. We can also help you with questions you might have about My Aged Care or Medicare. If you have someone who does not speak English as a first language, we can provide translated information as well. If you are sick of hearing my voice, which I'm sure most of you are, you can also find all our resources online. Now, we do have quite a few questions coming through, so I might get Delaney and Julie to join me back and I'll ask some questions. Here we go. Okay, great. So the first question is for Julie. I am ovo-lacto vegetarian, so I don't eat fish. How can I substitute, especially for things that are rich in omega-3?
Okay, so walnuts and flaxseed or flaxseed oil would be a good substitute there. So you probably, if you had about probably a tablespoon of walnuts would give you a good amount of omega-3, or maybe 2 teaspoons of flaxseed oil a day, or even a tablespoon of flax seeds themselves sprinkled over different dishes.
Okay, great. The next question is for Delaney. Could you please explain what AREDS 2 is? Is it a supplement brand or a formulation?
Okay, so AREDS 2, that's an acronym. It stands for Age-Related Eye Disease Study Number 2. It's slightly different from the supplements we were talking about in this webinar. So we were talking about how to supplement the diet. The AREDS 2 supplement, that is specifically for AMD, and it's separate from the diet. So the study that was conducted was looking at people that were on all different diets. So the AREDS 2 formula is appropriate for people in particular stages of AMD, so the intermediate stages in one eye or both eyes, or the late stage in one eye. And it was found to slow down progression in about 25% of people. There is a lot more information on that. If you would like more information, you can give us a call or we can send some fact sheets out to you.
Okay, great, excellent. So we actually have a lot of questions coming in, so I'll probably try to answer the most common ones. So this one is for you, Julie. If you are on Warfarin, are Seville oranges different to normal oranges, and can we still eat normal oranges?
Yes, so Seville oranges are sort of more of they tend to be a little bit sour. So they're a little bit like can be a little bit like eating a lemon. I have been told that they're very good for making marmalade, but I suggest that you probably need a lot of sugar. So Yeah, there is no problem with eating oranges, and like really with anything, with any food connected with warfarin, even grapefruit really, if you had, for example, a grapefruit once a month, that would be unlikely to make a huge difference. But if you were going to eat grapefruit or grapefruit juice every single day, then that definitely could make a difference. So it's all about just having small amounts and trying to keep that at a regular time, sort of each week really, rather than sort of fluctuating from week to week, because that's what's going to make a huge difference to your INR levels in particular.
Okay, great. And another orange question, keep on the orange train, just clarifying, how many whole oranges a day would you recommend?
Well, I think the study recommended that it was equal to 1 or more oranges. I don't think you would want to go out and suddenly sort of start eating 5 oranges a day, but certainly like 1 to 2 oranges would be fine. So 1 to 2 oranges, we're looking at a full glass of orange juice. So half a glass of orange juice is about the equivalent to 1 serving of fruit.
Okay, excellent. And then Delaney, a question for you now. If I eat all the foods that you were showing, do I still need to take the supplements as well? I take lutein as well as Blackmore's MacuVision Plus. So if you're already getting it through your diet, do you need to still take supplements?
Yes, so in terms of supplementing the diet, so that's your lutein supplement there, it really depends on if you're getting enough of those nutrients. I'd probably advise to speak to a GP or a dietitian about that to see if you are getting enough nutrients. If you are, then you don't really need to take those supplements. Now, the AREDS 2 supplement, which is Blackmore's MacuVision Plus, is based off that AREDS 2. Again, like I said before, it's separate to diet. So regardless of what you're having in your diet, you can still take that to help slow the progression of AMD.
Yeah, okay, excellent. Great. So another question for you, Delaney. Just wondering why oily fish are recommended. However, taking fish oil supplements is not.
Okay, so we're not saying don't take fish oil supplements. All we're saying is that there's no research to show that fish oils or krill oils will slow down the progression of AMD. Fish oils and krill oil, the tablets may be beneficial for other health conditions, but just specifically with AMD, there's just no research to show that it will help.
Right, okay, great. A question for you, Julie. How much is 1 serving of fish?
So 1 serving of fish is usually between about 65 grams of fish. So generally 65 to 100 grams of fish would be the equivalent of 1 serve.
Okay, excellent. And another question for you, Julie. Is celery considered a good green to be taken or juiced every day?
That's a good question. Look, I can't see I can't see any issues with having celery as being juiced every day. And certainly some people might struggle with the fibre in celery, people who have some gastric upsets. But as to whether it's good or not, again, we've sort of got to really look at our whole intake of vegetables. So if we're having a lot of celery to the exclusion of other things, then that's not necessarily sort of beneficial in eating a lot of variety of vegetables. If a lot of our diet's based on one vegetable in particular.
So it's just all about balance, just like life, all about balance. Yep. And another question for you, Julie. How many pieces of fruit per day would you recommend?
Well, the recommendation is 2 pieces of fruit a day, usually for most age groups. Children, I think young children probably slightly less, but certainly I think to go over that shouldn't cause an issue. 2 to 3 pieces would be fine, and certainly that depends again on the size of the fruit. So if it's a smaller fruit, then 2 sort of small plums would be the equivalent of having a medium apple.
Yeah, Okay, great. Still on that same train of thought, how much spinach would you recommend eating a day? I guess spinach is one of those things that seems so big until you cook it and then it just shrinks into nothing.
It does, doesn't it? And again, that's dependent on a number, whether you are taking warfarin or not, in which case you wouldn't want to overdo it. But again, a serve of spinach, so like a cup of like spinach that's raw, so as a salad, or half a cup of cooked spinach would be considered as a serve.
Yeah, and is there a difference between cooking, say, spinach or kale, cooking it or having it raw? Is there a better way to get those nutrients into your diet? Is it better to have them just in a salad versus cooking them in a fry pan?
Well, if we are looking at the carotenoids in particular, then certainly in vegetables they can be trapped within the matrix, and so cooking the vegetables does release some of those nutrients.
Yeah.
So
okay.
It depends on what we're actually looking for as far as, and I think to have a variety is, again, we look at, yes, okay, we cook some, but that doesn't mean to say we don't ever eat a carrot raw, for example, because we're just not going to get a similar benefit from some nutrients.
Yeah, right. Okay, so just a question for Delaney now. What foods would you say are bad for your eye health?
Oh, we do have sort of general statements regarding that. So we say, try not to eat foods which are high in saturated fats. We do say, don't have a lot of sugar, things like that. However, in terms of particularly AMD, there's no specific foods that we say, don't have at all. So there are some foods such as saffron, which some people say, might be beneficial for AMD. However, there's just no research to say that it is or it isn't. So there's not much research to look at which foods are detrimental. So we more say maintain a general healthy diet, as Julie was speaking about, and then just trying to focus on those particular foods for AMD.
Yeah. Great. You actually read my mind, Delaney, because one of the questions was, is saffron good for your eyes? But you've already answered it. And just, I guess, a comment and a question for Julie. I think it should be clarified, is flaxseed also known as linseed?
No, flaxseed, I think, and linseed are two separate seeds.
Yeah.
I don't think they're quite the same.
Okay.
So they're two different types of seeds there, I think.
Yeah. Okay, great. And now another question for you, Julie. Do you have a recommended juicing recipe that includes leafy greens that'll still make the juice taste nice? No, I don't. I must admit, I'm not a fan of green vegetable juices. I think they need to have quite a bit of fruit juice mixed in with them for me to sort of really find them palatable. Some people really like the taste, but I'm not one of them. So no, I don't have a recipe for green juice. I think it's a case of experimenting yourself and finding out what works for you. Yeah, exactly. And then a question for you, Delaney. This might be one that's a little trickier to answer. How is a person in a nursing home catered for if diagnosed with AMD in terms of food, or is it even considered? I'm guessing this is something that's very dependent on the nursing home itself.
Actually, I might just hand that one over to Julie. Because you work in that sort of aged care sphere, do you know how that would be addressed?
I was certainly thinking that is quite a tricky one, because once people start to get to the point where they're in an aged care facility, we start to have other influences on diet, including like swallowing difficulties, for example. And so some foods on a particular level of diet for someone who has swallowing problems may exclude some foods, and in particular green leafy salad vegetables are one of those foods that unless someone has no swallowing difficulty, it'll be recommended that they don't have those foods. I guess you would hope that the actual quality of the menu would provide enough opportunities for people to be able to eat those healthy foods every day. Whether that's the reality or not, that's difficult to assess, or you would have to be looking at the menu for a particular individual nursing home.
Yeah, okay. Great, so I think that comes to the end of all our questions. Thank you all so much for sending in those questions. If you do have any further ones, please feel free to email MDFA and we can answer them. And more specifically, if you have anything in regards to nutrition or you'd like some more information on nutrition, you can always keep in touch with Julie and her team. The details of her website and helpline number are on the screen now. So thank you so much to Julie and Delaney.